Hi, welcome to Susan Stanley's Stitch in Time. On this channel, we like to visit topics like cross stitch, quilting, sewing notions from the past, and textiles. Today is a special edition floss tube where I'm going to share with you the way I hand piece for quilting. Now, I've had a lot of requests for this because, as you know, I'm a quilter, and I think it's a fun thing to try if anyone who enjoys needle and thread. Why do I like hand piecing? Your pieces end up accurate when they're finished. If you stitch on your stitching line, you're going to have a beautiful block that finishes just the size you want it to. It's also a way for us to connect with the stitchers of the past. You know, before the sewing machine became a domestic item that was in everybody's home, everything we used was hand stitched. From the bed linens to the clothing to draperies, everything, or woven. So I think it's a really mindful way to get into somebody else's shoes and see how they lived. I also think it's a way to slow down, and it's very meditative for me. It's a little bit like cross stitch in that way, that you're slowing down and you're just making stitches and kind of getting into a rhythm. Now for hand piecing, I think it's best to begin with shapes that are straight and not on an angle. So although my stamping tutorial was on an elongated hexagon, this piecing tutorial is going to be using squares to make a 4-patch. And I'm going to insert a picture here of a 4-patch. So here's the block that we're going to look at making today, and I'm going to show you how to put it together. In my last tutorial, I showed you how to stamp, and the stitching of a square is going to make this process of learning so much easier. So let's get started. So today, like I said, we're working with squares instead of elongated hexagons because there are no angles. If you're interested in a little more in-depth hand piecing tutorial on the elongated hexagon, please let me know and I can add that to my video series. All right, so what do we need? Well, we need thread, and I like this thread, which is prime piecing thread. It's a 2-ply 70 weight glazed cotton. It's made by YLI, and it comes in a variety of colors. If I was doing this for myself today and not sharing it with you, I would be using this ivory. I am actually going to be using a red thread so you can see what I'm doing. All right, the next thing you need is a pair of scissors, and I love my little Dovo thread snips. You need pins. Now the pins that I use are Karen K. Buckley's ultra fine piecing pins. And as you can see, they are almost like a hair. They're almost actually like an acupuncture needle. They're really fine, but they hold things in place beautifully and don't add any bulk to what you're working on. You need a pin cushion. You need a needle. And I like these Gina Kimball golden straw 124 karat gold straw needles. I use the number 11 for piecing, but you can get this packet and have all the size options available to you. They glide really nicely. They have a very smooth eye. They're just a nice quality needle. You need a thimble. I could do a whole tutorial on thimbles, but the thimble I like to use at this stage of my life the most is my tailor's thimble. And you actually push from the side of your finger instead of from the top, and that just seems to relieve a lot of the stress and pressure and pain in my hands. So that is a tailor's thimble. It's a good habit to, when you're hand piecing or quilting or anything, to keep a needle on. You'll get used to it. At first it feels like a new ring. It's awkward, it's bothersome. But when you don't use it and you have a problem with the needle going in your fingernail, or you wear your hands out from pushing those heavy needles through thick layers of fabric, you'll be glad you got yourself used to it. All right, and then of course you're going to need your fabric, and you'll need 2 opposing colors, and so I just picked 2 lights and 2 darks to start off. Now, you know, traditionally for all stitching, before the domestic sewing machine became available to everybody, things were all stitched by hand. All clothing items, household linens, pajamas, dresses, bodices, waistcoats, jackets, you name it. It was all hands pieced. So the quilting was just a natural outpouring of that. And we're really lucky. We live in a time where we can stitch for pleasure and just for relaxation. Again, if you watch the tutorial on stamping fabric for piecing, you'll learn how I prepared my pieces, but I'm going to show you how these pieces. Now, normally I wash my fabric, I starch it, and I press it, and then it's ready to be stamped. And this stamp is actually a different brand than the one I showed you in my last tutorial. Let's see if we can get that to focus here. It's a stamp that looks like this, so it's on the lucite. It has a solid line for the cutting and a hatched line for the stitching. And these stamps are from a company named By Kate. And this is a set of stamps to make this quilt block, but you can also use the pieces for other things, which I will probably show you at some point, some other things you can do with this stamp set. It comes with the square that I showed you. And it comes with the triangle, and it comes with the diamond. So, used just like the elongated hexagon. So you can refer back to that tutorial if you try another stamp. All right. So to make the 4-patch block, you'll need, of course, like I said, 2 of each color, the darker colors. And the first thing you need to do is you're going to pin along the stitching line at the beginning, middle, and end. And so I'm just going to move this tray out of the way, and I'm going to take 2 of these pieces, a light and a dark, and I'm going to put them right sides together. Now, my cutting might have been a tiny bit off. I think I left the stamped line on this one, and I cut it off on that one. I'm not worried about that. The most important thing to make your patches fit together is that to make your stitching line as accurate as possible. So what we're going to do to ensure that happens is we're going to pin our stitching line. And we're going to take these nifty little very fine pins, and we're going to go right into the corner, because unlike a sewing machine, you do not stitch the seam allowance. And I'm going to go into the corner on the back. All right, so I've got my pin in. The more accurate you are with your pinning, the more accurate you will be with your stitching. So I can see that I'm off just a tiny bit, so it's worth it to me to just take that out and move it over. Right, and I'm going to pin these horizontally. That is something that's also different than machine piecing. All right, now I'm going to go to the end of the line, and I'm going to do the same thing in the corner, pinning through the top layer and making sure it matches up exactly on the back layer. And I don't know if you can see that. but that pin is off. So I'm going to lift the fabric and then just place it, move it down, and place it right where it needs to be. And then I'm going to pin this with the point of the pin facing toward our first pin where we're going to start our stitching, because I stitch from right to left. Okay, now this is not a very long piece, but I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in the middle just so you can see how that works. So the same thing here, I'm going to pin the center. I'm going to look on the back. Nope, it's not lined up. I'm going to line that up, and you can just gently massage your pieces if they're not lining up. Don't be bothered by that extra bit. It's not going to show. It's not going to cause a problem. It's not enough to worry about. And we're going to pin with the point facing our first pin. Okay, and I'm off. So this is actually good because sometimes you have to fuss with a little bit. What I'm showing you, everything is going down in slow motion, and everything is going to be very detailed. You will get into a rhythm with this if you take it on, and you will be stitching kind of like with your cross stitch, or if you're a hand quilter, the same thing. It becomes kind of mechanical and you know, just very, very meditative. Okay, I have my pins ready to go. So I'm ready now to thread my needle, and I'm going to take my number 11 straw needle. That's what I like to use. And instead of doing some of the things that people do, like wetting the thread or anything like that, I'm going to show you how I like to thread a needle. You're going to take the end. I haven't cut it yet. I haven't cut this red thread yet off the spool. It's still on the spool. You're going to take the end that's coming off the spool and hold it firm. Right, so we're going to hold the needle, and we're going to hold the thread, and we're going to actually put the eye of the needle in over the thread, over the end of the thread. Okay, and pull it through. And now we're going to cut our 15 to 18 inch length. And that's just so your thread doesn't get worn through that eye over and over and over again. All right, and now we'll start our piecing. Our needle is threaded. Of course, if you're having a lot of trouble, there are needle threaders available. Okay, we're going to stick our needle right in that corner, and we're going to take a stitch and just hold the needle there, and then now we're going to take this pin out because we have our piece secured. And we're going to take another stitch with our needle, and we're not super worried about the beauty of our stitches. You can improve that skill over time. The most important thing now is to make your stitches as even and consistent as you can, but they're not going to show. You need them to have the strength to hold your piece together. All right, so I've done 2 stitches, and you can see those little humps. That's where the stitches are going to be. And I'm going to pull this through. Now you notice I haven't made a knot. We're not going to make a knot for this. We're going to leave a tail. And then we're going to take the needle and we're going to go back through the middle, those open places. And we're going to go back to the beginning. And we're going to go through the middle of that stitch. I'm going to show you that. We've gone right up through the middle of that stitch. All right, and now we're going to go down through that open space, and we're going to come up in the exact same place that we started. Okay, see that? We're coming up right where we started, and there's our stitches on the front, and there's our stitches on the back. All right, they're not horrible, they're not beautiful, but you know what? They're going to be just fine. They're going to be perfect. They're going to hold our piece together. This is different than cross stitch where you have a beautiful, clean little X. These stitches will improve over time as you practice and become more and more beautiful. But the most important thing is that they're close together enough that that your piece will hold together. So I'm also going to put on my thimble, so I have that ready. Okay, now I'm going to take some stitches again, and what you basically are doing is weaving the fabric onto the needle. And I'm just going to let you watch now as I fold the fabric onto the point, and I'm feeling that point through the back. It's poking me, and now it's sticking out, and the length that it sticks out is going to determine how long my stitch is. So we don't want to get too worried about that. We want it to be we don't want it to be a ½ an inch, because then the pieces wouldn't hold together well. Want it to be about 1/8 of an inch, but you know. And then weave the fabric on. And we're going to do load about 4 stitches onto your needle. Okay, and so you can see how that's woven on and it's kind of gathered up, and so then we're going to push the needle through and pull it. All right, and now we're going to make a back stitch. We're going to go back 1. All right, and do the same thing again. Weave your fabric, kind of weaving it onto the needle. I'm kind of working together with my needle and my fabric, kind of doing this gentle folding action. Okay, I can see my stitch length right there because the needle is showing through, and that will be my thread when I pull the needle through. Okay, and I'm going to make a back stitch. All right, now I'm running into my pin, so I'm going to take it out because we're ready to go. Let's check the back. We're off a tiny bit. I'm going to have to be a little more careful. I'm actually just off of that stitching line a tiny bit. So I'm going to go back down here and redo my needle. There we go. Everything within the area that you stitch is going to be the size of your patch. So like I said before, you don't worry about what's going on out here as much. You just worry about being accurate on that stitching line. So we're going to take 3 stitches or 4, let's see, 1, and then fold the fabric, 2, fold the fabric back, 3, fold the fabric, and 4, and I'll push this through. Let's see. All right, we're lining up pretty well on the stitching line. Now, my stitches aren't beautiful, they're not perfect, but it's going to hold together just fine. We're not striving for perfection, we're striving for strength and integrity so that this will hold together. Eventually, your stitches will get better. I've done this a lot, and you can see today mine aren't that great, but it really doesn't matter. Okay, keep going, 3 stitches. And it's kind of a rocking action, and we're going to go back now. Why am I doing this? Why am I going back? This is 1 thread that's going to hold those pieces of fabric together. On a sewing machine, you have a spool and a bobbin, and they engage and interlock. And so you actually have 2 interlocking threads running along your seam when you use a machine. When you hand piece, you have 1. And so to do that little back stitch holds that fabric and just strengthens the integrity of your stitch. Okay, now I'm coming to the end. I'm going to take my pin. I'm not going to pull it out all the way. I'm going to pull out the farthest end. Okay, it's still in the fabric. Like that. And I'm going to pin it down vertically now. It's no longer horizontal, it's vertical because we're getting up to the end. Why do I pin horizontally? Because I have 2 points on the pin that are holding this line in place. You can see, even though I've done that, well, it's pretty good. It's on the line. If you don't do that, then your patches slip apart and you won't get the accuracy in this area that you want. All right, so I'm going to weave this on. We're almost to the end. You can see I'm backing my needle out when it's too long, when the length is too long and the stitch is going to be too big. Okay, I'm coming out right where that pin is. So I'm going to take the pin out now. And I'm at the end. We're not going to make a knot. We're going to go back, just like we did in the beginning, in the middle of that stitch. 1, come up, we're still going back in the middle of the stitch, down, and now we're going to stitch to the end and pull our thread completely out. And snip it. So we can pull here, let's snip it. And we can pull here and our patch is secure. Then I like to do just a little bit of a finger press to kind of train the fabric. So I put the light one down on the table, I open it like a book, I leave this going in that direction, I gently push the dark over and I finger press it, trying to open that seam up as much as possible. Look at that, you can't even see the red thread. Even though those stitches are not perfect under there looks wise, they are going to hold that patch together beautifully. There's not going to be any problem with that coming apart. Okay? So our first 2 patches done. I'm going to do the second one and then I'm going to show you how to put them together. All right, now we have two patches. And you can see that to make your 4 patch, your colors are opposing on opposing sides. So if you have it like this, you need to flip it. All right, and so we're going to take one and lay it on top of the other. Now, if you've done patchwork on the machine, some of this might be a tiny bit different because we don't deal with the seam allowance. We're going to do the same thing with pins. We're going to pin the corner, and that one's off. So I'm going to readjust it, making sure that pin is going right in the corner. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the middle. I'm going to push the seam allowance to the side. I want that away from me. I'm not dealing with that. That's not going to be put in to my stitching or my pin. I'm going to go right into the corner on this top piece and right into the corner on the back piece. Okay, and I'm going to face that pin toward my first pin so that the point is facing that, and let's check it on the back. Yep, looks good. The pin is right on the stitching line. Okay, I'm going to put one on the end now. I'm going to go right into the corner on the top piece, right into the corner on the bottom piece. Okay, and then I'm going to point it towards my first pin and make sure that that pin is lined up on the stitching line on the back and the front. Okay, and now I'm going to go into the middle of each of my patches and pin from the top to the back, making sure that that sewing line is lined up. Put my point toward the first one, my pin in the top and the back, and make sure my pin is pointing towards the first one. All right, we're going to start just like we did when we did our 2-patch. We're going to take the needle and go right in at the first pin. Take that pin out. We're going to make 2 stitches, kind of weaving them on to your needle, pulling them through with ease so that you have your tail. We're going to go backwards, back 2 stitches, coming out at that initial place that we entered the stitch. These back stitches are not woven on. I just poke and stab and pull. Okay, so now we're secure. We can pull our tail, we can pull our thread, nothing's going to move. And we're just going to start stitching. So remember, it's weaving on. You can just watch. And this is where the whole process just becomes so relaxing, because once you're a little bit faster and it becomes a little bit automatic, it's just relaxing and peaceful to stitch. Okay, we loaded about 3 or 4 stitches. We're taking a back stitch, and here we go again. 1, 2, and we're getting into the territory of that pin. 3, take out that middle pin. Flatten it out. Let's check the back. Yep, we're staying on the line. Take a back stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, take a back stitch. All right, we're getting to the corner and to the middle. Now this is the only place where we're going to do something new, is when we get to the middle. I'm going to take that pin and pivot it like we did initially, and set it in there vertically. Okay, and keep stitching until I get to the end. Make sure that that seam allowance is out of the way. We don't want that seam allowance stitched into our stitching. This is where it's different than the machine, because your seam allowance does get stitched into the stitching. Okay, take a back stitch. Keep going. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to take one little tiny stitch to get right into that corner there. Okay, so now I'm going to take out my needle, or my pin, pardon me, pull my needle, and I'm taking a back stitch right there where those two, where all those layers meet. Okay, I'm taking a back stitch right there. Okay, pull it, make it tight. Going to lift up my seam allowance. I'm going to go in from the side just through the seam allowance. Now I'm on the other side of the seam allowance. I'm going to go down to the back. I'm not catching the seam allowance, I'm just dealing with the corners. We're going to go around and go in through all 4 corners to secure this center part. All right, so we've gone from this white piece under this through the seam allowance, but not stitching it down, to this blue piece on the top. Now we're going from the blue piece on the top to the white piece on the back. We're going to come out. We're going to take the patch now and go from this white piece on the back through the seam allowance to the blue piece on the back. All right. And then we're going to go up to the top. Okay, that's where we started, right? We started here, we stitched, we went around the center to secure it. We're not tacking down the seam allowance, we're just going through that whole, all the way around that center. Okay, we already took our back stitch on the light side. We're going to go through the seam allowance. Now we've tacked it together. We're going to go through the seam allowance again. We're going to take a stitch into the dark and a back stitch up to that corner because we want this corner really secure. All right. So you've gone around and around, you've come back out, you've come across now onto the dark side. You've taken a stitch and a back stitch, and now we're ready to finish stitching this together. So let's weave 3 stitches on. Okay, and pull it. We're off a tiny bit. I think it'll be okay. We're going to back stitch. We're going to weave 1. Make sure we're coming right on that line. That pin's in the way now. I'm going to move it because we're moving into that area. Okay, we'll take a back stitch. Some people take 2 back stitches. There are different methods for hand piecing. This is just what I use. Okay, this end pin, I'm going to take it out on the far side, keep it poked into the corner, and turn it vertical. Okay, so we're right there at the end. Our stitches are on the stitching line. We're just going to do 2 stitches back. You can hear the needle making noise going through the thread. Come right out on that corner and snip it. Put your needle in your pin cushion, and we can open up our block and see how it looks. And it looks great. It's going to be great. Now, traditionally with hand piecing, you wait till the end to press. It's really hard not to want to press. When you machine piece, you typically press toward the darker fabric, but you can see back here, this can open up or do just about anything because the seam has not been held down. So we're just going to leave it like that for now. You can make about a whole bunch more of these and put together a quilt. So as you can see, the stitches are not like a machine. As you stitch more, they become more even and more machine-like, but that's really not the point. The most important point is that they're small enough, but not too small, that you've backstitched, that you've held your pieces together securely so that when your quilt is used and somebody sits on it and pieces are pushed apart, they're going to hold together, and you can't even see the red thread when I pull these apart. So I know that this is a really strong piece, has a lot of integrity, and that thread is not going to break. And my piece is not going to fall apart. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you found that interesting and maybe something you'd like to try. Stitching in all its forms is such a pleasurable thing for me in my life, and I'm sure for you as well. If you're watching this, I'm guessing it probably is. We looked at the materials you'd need and the process you will undergo to put together one 4-patch block. And so it's up to you now to try it, and I hope you do. And I'll be back next time with a regular floss tube. Until then, make time for stitching.